Hello and welcome to my presentation to the North Carolina Criminal Justice Association. I'm Matthew Robinson, professor at Appalachian State. This is part of a multi-year project I've been working on called Food Crime. I introduced the term food criminology to the disciplines of criminology and criminal justice several years ago, and I've been working on it ever since. This is the idea that certain foods called hyperpalatable or good foods actually amount to drugs and behave as such. So this is a presentation about the implications of that for our discipline. Remember the war on drugs, this thing we've been fighting for a really long time? This war, which I've also written about extensively and teach about, we use both demand reduction and supply reduction measures. Demand reductions target users. These are things like prevention messages as well as treatment. Supply reduction focuses on getting drugs off the streets, market disruption efforts at the border, drug eradication, arresting people, and things like that. Well, this is based on the logic that, yeah, people choose to use drugs of their own free will. However, since it's illegal, we arrest the dealers who give it to them for supplying those drugs or growing those drugs, selling those drugs, what have you. So then a tongue-in-cheek silly question is, well, if certain foods amount to drugs, which the literature tends to suggest they do, then who do we arrest for supplying them? Now, I don't literally mean people should be arrested for eating or providing food, but as a rhetorical question, it really shines light on some of the hypocrisies of the drug war, which is one of my main points. So there's lots of different definitions of drug, and I have written a complete paper on this. It's now under review at a journal, but I'm happy to share it with you if you'd like a copy. Here's one definition from the dictionary: any substance ingested into the body that causes physiological or psychological effects on your body. By that definition, certainly some food can be considered a drug. Think about how you feel when you eat a piece of chocolate, for example. Think about how you feel after you eat a monster thick burger from Hardee's, for example. It affects your body and your psychology. We also see that food can be habit forming or quote unquote addictive. But the definition of addiction varies as well because there's different definitions of that. Here's a kind of a standard definition: physical or psychological dependence or a need to a substance that leads to tolerance, which is needing more of the substance over time to achieve the desired effect. And withdrawal symptoms, those are the physical symptoms that you suffer when you stop ingesting the drug. And abuse is an outcome of addiction. Generally, abuse is diagnosed based on the disruptions that you have in a person's life. So if you're having problems at school, work, any type of relationship because of drugs, then that signifies problem use, misuse, or abuse. So if we look at this, in my literature review in the paper that I mentioned, examines the extensive literature, the growing literature on food addiction. Some foods are certainly addictive. So food addiction is a relatively new idea, at least in criminology, not so much in nutrition. And it's measured by the Yale Addiction Scale. So I would encourage you to just look this up, Google it, the Yale Food Addiction Scale. And it asks about lots and lots of questions about people's eating habits in the past year, the way they interact with food, problems that it causes them, and things like that. And what we see from this research is a significant amount of people sometimes have difficulty controlling the type of food they eat. And these include things like sweets. These include things like starches. These include things like salty snacks. These include things like fatty foods. And these include things like sugary drinks. These right here are your hyperpalatable foods, your foods that are very flavorful and tend to be abused by people, or can be at least. These are highly processed, which means that all of the nutritional value of these things has been taken out through the processing of the food into a food product that is marketed to you, and it's generally much more affordable than healthier options that would not lead to food addiction. So the Yale Food Addiction Scale is based on symptoms of substance abuse taken from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. So that suggests scholars, scientists believe it is akin to substance abuse, food addiction. Studies show, for example, and all of this, the extensive research again is reviewed in my paper, food changes the brain the same way that drugs do by altering neurotransmitter levels in the brain. Some foods produce, like those ones I mentioned, produce intense cravings, just like drugs. These foods also can lead to tolerance, needing more of the food to achieve the desired effect. Some people who discontinue certain foods have withdrawal symptoms. This is less clear. There's less support for that in literature. But there is also documented misuse of food, like compulsive eating, and you'll see there's a relationship between food addiction, binge eating, and drug abuse. And finally, numerous social problems, including, most notably, illness and death, which I'll touch upon in a moment. So here are some quotes from the research. And I realize this is a lot of information, but this is stuff right out of my paper. You'll see these are quotes from scholars. The scholars are noted that scholars believe that drug addiction is similar to drug abuse. Food addiction is similar to drug abuse, I should say, because it impacts certain neurobiological circuits in the brain. It affects the same neurochemicals in the brain, neurotransmitters, same kind of addiction-like behaviors. And then there's correlates between drug abuse and obesity become really clear. So you'll see as well, not only obesity, but also binge eating disorder, very clear relationship between eating too much and developing binge eating disorder. But you'll see that scholars are increasingly, I should say, noting the similarities between food addiction and drug addiction, as well as alcohol addiction and gambling addiction. Very similar in terms of the research and what the findings hold. So remember, we have a war on drugs. We target users, but especially the dealers. The great bulk of our drug war budget goes to supply reduction. Historically, that's always been that way. People choose to use drugs, but we still arrest the dealers. So if these foods do in fact meet the definition of drug, who do we arrest? Again, this is a rhetorical question to get you thinking about the drug war. Here's why it matters to us. Criminology, criminal justice, the study of harmful behaviors, particularly harmful behaviors committed to us by other people. The foods we eat are far more dangerous than criminal victimization. This is all deaths from crime, according to the Federal Bureau of Investigation from 2012. The reason that I used this year, the data, is because there was a landmark study about death from food in the same year. So this is your total. The largest portion, not a majority, but the largest portion are handgun or gun deaths, right? Well, the majority are gun deaths, but the largest portion are handgun deaths. Same year, by the way, 42,000 people died from drug overdoses. Those are illicit drugs. Okay. Here is your deaths from food in the same year, 395,000. You notice the way they read this? This is sodium. This is not enough nuts and seeds. This is processed meat, lack of omega-3 vitamins, too few veggies, too few fruits. Sugar-sweetened beverages kills more people in a year than drugs, all drugs, and kills more than crime. So this number of food deaths greatly outweighs the number of deaths by drugs as well as all crime. See, if we're criminologists and we study harmful acts committed by other people against the innocent, what have you, and we ignore this, we're ignoring something very significant, much more significant than drugs and street crime. I know you're like, well, I choose what I eat. Exactly. But then you choose the drugs you put in your body too. So why does this matter? You'll see in the research, this is established in my paper and some of the other stuff that I've done in this area, there's culpability or moral and legal responsibility in the production, advertising, and sales of our food. Therefore, recognizing there's corporate culpability for the foods that we consume, that we need to rethink what we label as crime, and we need to rethink what we think when we were conceiving of a war on crime, as well as what we consider to be a drug and a war on drugs. That's the purpose of this research, is to get people thinking and to have us refocus on harmful behaviors that are committed against us where there's culpability by others. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Contact me online as well, and I'm happy to send you the paper. Hope you enjoyed the presentation and that it makes you think.